Now moving to the Eastern Cape, the case of a Port Elizabeth father who faces the charge of child abuse has been postponed to the 23rd of April by the New Brighton Magistrates Court. He allegedly tossed his one-year-old daughter on top of a shack roof during the demolition of the illegal structures at Joe Slovo near KwaDwesi. The 38-year-old was using the toddler as a shield to delay the demolition. The baby was caught by a policeman and placed in the care of a social worker. At the 11th hour before his appearance, the charge was changed from attempted murder to child abuse pending further investigation. His defence team argued that he should be released before his bail application as he's facing charges related to a Schedule 1 offence. The accused has been in police custody since his arrest.
Well, the shocking incident occurred during the demolition of illegal structures conducted by the Nelson Mandela Bay municipality. For more, we're joined by counselling psychologist in studio, Jeremy Bayer. Good afternoon, Jeremy. Thank you for joining us on the SABC News Desk.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
You just saw there the distressing images coming out of Joe Slovo informal settlement. Help us to understand the state of the mind of this particular father, taking into account the circumstances he found himself in. Leaving one's home and belongings are always very emotive. In this case, watching it being razed to the ground or destroyed, and perhaps feeling that his basic needs even are not being met.
So right off the bat, the first question is what is in the best interest of the child. The fact that they're in the hands of a social worker is fantastic, and that the child is being seen to. As far as the father's state of mind is concerned, there are numerous mitigating factors. Firstly, this issue of land cannot only be seen legally or politically, it has to be seen from a humanitarian perspective. So when you move house, there are issues of trauma, the issues of what will happen to me and my children. Will I be able to still feed my children and clothe them and house them? There's the long-standing land issue anyway, on a sort of broader systemic level. There's that issue too. And the big one for me is, were these people debriefed as far as leaving their home is concerned, or was it a sudden shock? So in that case, you've got to ask questions of the DA. Was there empathy from their side?
Yes, and you've actually preempted my next question. Tell us how more thorough engagement or consultation would have helped avert a near-fatal situation like this one. So
the DA in that situation is their constituency. Have to sit down and say, okay, how do we plan this from a legal perspective, a political perspective, and in this case a humanitarian perspective. So have to go into these communities and say, okay, this is what we're planning to do, this is how we plan to do it. How can we help you in terms of your plans moving forward? Can we help you with what your future plans might be? If you're highly distressed of this, we have social workers who can help you. Perhaps discuss issues around food and that type of thing. So speak to the government involved in that area as far as food and housing and clothing is concerned. You cannot approach this from a sort of cold, calculated, matter-of-fact approach, because it's simply not going to work. You are going to get hostility and anger. These are human beings, not robots. That is how they should have approached it.
Okay, the baby, we understand, is in the care of the mother for now, under the close watch of social services. What kind of interventions or assessments will the child undergo now to secure her future mental and psychological well-being?
Look, I don't know the extent of how bad it was, but a child that young, obviously you can't speak to, so you'll see it in behaviour. Perhaps if they are crying a lot more, perhaps during the night if they're waking up a lot more and sort of their persistent sleep disturbances, and just general behavioural issues, perhaps some excessive urination, those type of things, because the child might be more anxious. Those are examples of some symptoms that you may see. But if the child is being supported now, and also the state of mind of these parents, you still have to wonder, regardless of how angry you are or the issue at hand, to take your child up on a roof.
No, we cannot condone violence against
You cannot condone that. So that is the number one thing to look at.
Jeremy, there were reports of some community members encouraging the dad to go ahead and throw the baby off the roof. We want to understand what motivates this kind of crowd behavior. In this particular context, where frustrations are running high, tensions are running high, residents are facing a huge housing backlog.
that speaks to a few things. Speaks to level of frustration, speaks to lack of communication, and that they've sort of perhaps been in the dark for so long and suddenly this has been thrust upon them. It speaks to a human rights issue in that they're not getting what they want, poor sanitation, poor housing, and suddenly they just have to go and do something. So when you are treated in an inhumane manner, you're gonna have a sort of point of no return mentality where you don't care anymore and you're willing to say or do what you want. That is what happens when you're that angry.
Yes.
So whilst I can't condone it, this is what happens when your dignity is stripped from you, when you're this angry that you will resort to anything. And I can never say to these people, your thinking is irrational, because I'll never know what how they feel. It's wrong. But this speaks to, on a broader perspective, that we have to look at this from a humanitarian perspective as well.
All right, Jeremy, this footage has gone viral across the country. What do you think the impact of this is going to be on the public consciousness, especially when it comes to similar type of protests? And what's the risk of copycat behavior? Because that's always a huge concern.
Yeah, there is a risk of that. There's a risk of vigilante behavior. That's at the end of the day what this comes down to, is taking the law into your own hands. So there's a risk that it may not be the same thing that they do with a child, but vigilante behavior. So there's a risk of that, and so in a situation like this, this requires leadership. Leadership from the Eastern Cape and leadership from the government to have more of a voice on this land issue, and social workers and people like that to go and speak to these people and plan this thing better. That's what needs to happen, but not this cold matter-of-fact approach.
Very quickly, the father behind bars for now, what kind of counselling or intervention would we want to see there?
He needs trauma counselling. Trauma because of his future, because of what happened, to look at his state of mind that led to it, not condoning him, but there must be so much fear and anxiety about his future, as well as for him, his dignity being stripped. So trauma counselling and giving him an opportunity to speak as well.
Jeremy Bayer, counselling psychologist, joining us here on the desk at the SABC News Channel. Thank you so much for being generous with your time with us at the SABC News Channel.